Good morning, everybody. Here we're reading through 1 Kings chapters 1 and 2, and there's some Psalms in there as well. This is a very, very tricky part of history, and anytime that there's a change in leadership, especially in those days, it could be tricky. It still could be tricky today, depending on your political system that you have in place. I'd never want to be king because of all the assassinations that we see in history. But here we have an example of how important it is for righteous people to rise up in dark times and act according to the righteousness. That righteousness being in alignment with Father's heart. That's what righteousness is. It's about doing the right thing. Yahweh had said that Solomon was going to be king. He had declared it. David had discussed this with the officials. They had made plans for the temple that was going to be built. But yet, David's officials actually aligned themselves with another son. Maybe they didn't have confidence in Solomon. Maybe they felt that this other son would be a much better general, a much better king. Solomon was, although at first he had to do some violent things, he was a man of peace, much like his father's heart. But regardless, it was Yahweh who had decided this. It was Yahweh who chose Solomon. It wasn't David who chose Solomon. This had nothing to do with David's will and everything to do with Yahweh's will. And yet these officials joined in, and they really announced that this other son was king. But then we have the prophet and one of the higher priests and the future general come together. These righteous men came together to present to the king what was going on, to King David what was going on, so that he would act. And being older, they had to handle this properly and with care, and so they did. And they were risking their lives because they could have been killed in doing this. If they had failed with the king, David's son could have tracked them all down and killed them. But at great risk to themselves, they aligned themselves with Yahweh. David's officials aligned themselves in opposition to Yahweh. Now, it's Yahweh who chooses. We may not agree on the leadership. We may not agree. We may not think that they're best suited. We may not think a person is suited for ministry or suited to a certain position within ministry. But when the Lord anoints, that anointing should be clear to us. And it goes against our reasoning. And we have to align ourselves with Yahweh and not with reasoning. And because he has his purposes in that, and we don't always understand it, but we have to trust him. And so we see here that they rose up and they were able to keep the plans of Yahweh going. But could you imagine if these righteous men hadn't risked it, if they hadn't stood up in righteousness, and these other guys had succeeded in putting the wrong king in place? Not that Yahweh would have allowed that, but let's just say it had happened. Israel would have missed out on its golden years. Under Solomon, Israel prospered like it never prospered before. And the peace that they had, they would never get to experience that again. It was a wonderful golden age for them. And Yahweh knew what he was doing. But there's a place for the righteousness, for the righteous to rise up. Not in rebellion, but in wisdom. They didn't rebel. They didn't take up arms. They didn't They submitted themselves to the king, to the ruler, and they brought their concerns to the ruler, and they trusted that he would take the right actions, which he did. And we have to trust that Yahweh's in charge of these things, and we keep things aligned to him. When things get out of alignment with him, then that's our time to speak up with wisdom and grace. So there you go, something to think about today. You guys be blessed, be encouraged, love you all, enjoy the weather.